Revenge with Anjo.
Clara Hayes met Ethan Reed when they were both chasing dreams too big for their pockets. She was 24, designing websites from her tiny studio apartment in Portland. He was 26, a marketing intern with an old car and a head full of business ideas. They met at a friend's launch event where Ethan spoke passionately about building his own agency one day. "One day, I'll own the kind of firm that hires guys like me," he'd said, laughing nervously. Clara had smiled, handing him her card. "And I'll design your first website for free," she teased. They started talking that night and never stopped. They didn't have money, but they had shared ambition, the kind that made love feel like a team project. Their first year together was rough but beautiful. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment with creaky floors and a leaky faucet that never quite stopped dripping. Ethan often came home exhausted from client meetings that went nowhere. Clara would greet him with takeout and soft words. "One day, this'll all be worth it," she'd whisper. When bills piled up, she took extra freelance jobs, sometimes designing logos past midnight. Ethan would wake up, find her still at her desk, and cover her with a blanket. "You're my anchor, you know that?" he'd murmur. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. When Ethan's business idea finally took off, a digital branding agency called Northline Creative, it changed everything. Clients began calling, investors started noticing, and within a year, he had an office downtown. "We made it," Ethan said, lifting Clara off her feet in the kitchen, laughter spilling between them. She was 28, he was 30, and they believed the best was yet to come. Clara helped design the company's logo and website. She sat through late-night planning sessions and helped him practice presentations. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was part of the foundation. Ethan often said, "When this works, you'll never have to work again." Clara would smile, not realizing how those words would one day hurt. As Northline Creative grew, so did the distance between them. Ethan hired new staff, started traveling for business conferences, and began surrounding himself with people who admired him more than they knew him. The man who once made coffee for her before dawn now forgot to call for days. When Clara suggested reopening her design studio, Ethan smirked. "Sweetheart," he said lightly, "you don't need to work anymore. You've earned your rest." The tone wasn't loving, it was patronizing. Clara laughed softly, but her chest tightened. That night, as he scrolled through emails, she stared out their penthouse window and whispered, "When did I stop being part of your dream?" Months passed, and the woman who once built beside him now felt invisible. At corporate dinners, Ethan corrected her stories and joked about her creative phases. At galas, he introduced her as my better half, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Smile more, Clara," he'd whisper through clenched teeth when cameras flashed. She obeyed, even when it hurt. Each time he laughed too loudly at someone else's table, her heart chipped a little more. Still, she stayed, clinging to the memory of the man who once looked at her like she was his miracle. But memories can't hold forever. The more successful Ethan became, the less room there was for Clara in his world. He began hosting networking parties filled with laughter, champagne, and strangers who adored his confidence. Clara stood beside him, smiling for photographs, though she often felt like furniture, something expensive, but easily replaced. When she tried to talk about her ideas for a small home decor line, he waved his hand. "You're thinking too small, Clara. Let me handle the big stuff." The words stung more than he noticed. That night, as she removed her earrings in front of the mirror, she whispered to her reflection, "You used to believe in me too." Ethan's tone changed in private. He started nitpicking, how she dressed, how she spoke, how she laughed. "You interrupt too much," he'd say during dinner. "Try not to make every story about you." The first time he said it, she laughed softly. The third time she went quiet. At a gala, he corrected her pronunciation in front of clients. Laughter followed, and she smiled politely, holding back tears. When they got home, he acted as though nothing had happened. "You were stunning tonight," he said, kissing her cheek. Clara turned away, whispering, "You embarrass me." He shrugged. "Don't be sensitive, babe. It was just a joke." By their 7th year together, Clara barely recognized her life. The small apartment that once smelled of coffee and late-night takeout had been replaced by marble floors, city views, and silence. She began to feel like a ghost in her own marriage, present, but unseen. When she suggested a weekend trip together, Ethan scoffed. "I don't have time for vacations. Some of us actually work." Clara bit her lip, nodding. That night, she sat alone on the balcony, city lights flickering below. She whispered to herself, "You built this with him. You can build again alone." Then came the night that changed everything, the charity gala celebrating Northline's 10th anniversary. It was held in a glass ballroom overlooking the river, every chandelier dripping with light. Ethan had spent weeks planning it. "This one's going to make headlines," he'd said proudly. Clara had nodded, though she dreaded the evening. She wore a silver gown he'd chosen and stood beside him as the crowd poured in, investors, executives, socialites. Everyone wanted a photo with Ethan Reed, the self-made visionary. No one asked about the woman who once paid their rent by freelancing through the night. "Smile, darling," Ethan murmured as photographers approached. "You look too serious." "I'm just tired," Clara whispered. "Then try harder," he replied through his grin. The words hit harder than he intended. Clara forced a smile as flashbulbs went off. The night dragged on, laughter, champagne, empty congratulations. When the orchestra quieted, Ethan took the stage, glass of wine in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice full of confidence. "Tonight, we celebrate not just success, but resilience, belief, and partnership." Clara's heart lifted slightly, until his next words came. He turned to her with a grin that felt rehearsed. "And of course," he said, "I must thank my wife, Clara, the best investment I ever made. She might not know much about business, but she sure knows how to make a room look good." The crowd burst into laughter. A few clapped. Ethan chuckled along, soaking in the attention. But Clara's world went silent. The joke echoed in her ears like thunder. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every quiet encouragement, reduced to a punchline. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She simply set her napkin down. The room quieted as she rose. Her chair scraped softly against the marble floor. Ethan blinked. "Unsure." "Clara? Where are you going?" he asked with a forced laugh. She met his eyes, voice steady. "To find a life where I'm not a joke." Gasps rippled through the tables. Cameras froze. Without another word, she turned and walked out, past the chandeliers, past the whispers, past the man who had forgotten her worth. The cold night air hit her face like truth. She lifted her head to the sky and exhaled, her silver gown glimmering beneath the streetlights. Outside, the city hummed with life. Taxis honked. The wind carried faint music from the river. Clara stood by the curb, her phone buzzing endlessly, Ethan's name flashing across the screen. She turned it off. For the first time in years, she felt free. No expectations. No masks. Just her heartbeat, steady and alive. She found a cab and gave the driver the address of a small apartment complex she'd seen weeks ago online. "Starting over," she murmured as the car pulled away from the glittering hotel behind her. The apartment was small, one bedroom, old wooden floors, thin curtains that fluttered with every breeze, but it was hers. She slept on a mattress on the floor the first night, staring at the ceiling. "I'll rebuild," she whispered. The next morning, she sold her jewelry, pawned the diamond bracelet Ethan had once gifted her, and used the money to buy a used laptop and design software. The old dream she'd once buried, her design studio, came alive again. She called it Lumen House. It wasn't fancy, but it was a start. The first few months were brutal. She pitched her services to cafes and boutiques, often hearing no replies. Rent was late, and dinner was often instant noodles, but she didn't quit. When a friend offered her a small job redesigning a bakery, she threw herself into it completely. She painted walls herself, picked colors that felt like comfort, and crafted a space that breathed warmth. When the bakery reopened, customers couldn't stop talking about its charm. "Who designed this?" someone asked. The owner smiled. "A woman starting over." Word spread. One small project led to another. Clara's designs stood out because they told stories: calm light for peace, soft wood for hope, spaces that made people feel. Soon Lumen House became more than a name. It became a brand. Her inbox filled with requests, her savings grew, and her heart slowly healed. "You've built something beautiful," her assistant Lily told her one evening. Clara smiled. "No," she said softly. "I rebuilt myself." Months turned into a year. Magazines called her the woman who turned heartbreak into design. Invitations to speak at conferences poured in. When she appeared on a morning show, the host asked, "What inspired your journey?" Clara paused, her smile gentle. "Loss," she said. "Sometimes, losing everything helps you discover what truly matters." The studio's phone rang off the hook after that interview. Lumen House was no longer struggling, it was thriving. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire began to wobble. The very investors who once adored him started pulling out. Rumors spread about mismanagement and overspending. Northline's losing direction, one article read. Clara saw the headline while sipping coffee in her new office. She stared for a long time, then smiled softly. Not from revenge, but relief. "He'll have to face himself now," she whispered. Clara didn't gloat. She simply kept creating, designing homes, offices, and even a boutique hotel that became a city landmark. Her life was full, meaningful, and peaceful. She had replaced applause with authenticity, wealth with purpose. Yet, deep down, she knew life had one more test for her, one that would bring her face to face with her past. 3 years after she walked out of that ballroom, an envelope arrived at her office, gold-edged and elegantly embossed. It was an invitation to a charity gala. The same event, the same venue, the same cause. But this time, the envelope was addressed to Clara Hayes, founder, Lumen House Interiors. Her assistant looked curious. "Are you going to attend?" Clara looked out the window at the city she'd rebuilt herself in. "Yes," she said softly. "It's time." The night of the gala was cool and starlit. The ballroom sparkled just as it had years before: chandeliers, champagne, chatter. But this time, when Clara walked in, the room quieted. Her white gown shimmered under the lights, her hair pinned in a sleek twist, confidence radiating from her like calm fire. Cameras turned instantly. "Is that Clara Hayes?" someone whispered. "She's incredible." Ethan stood across the room, older, slightly heavier, the brightness in his eyes dimmed. His laughter sounded forced, his charm brittle. When he saw her, he froze. For a moment, the noise around him vanished. Clara smiled politely as their eyes met. He stepped closer, unsure. "Clara," he murmured, almost pleading. She tilted her head. "Ethan." Her tone was soft, neutral. The voice of a woman who no longer owed anyone pain or explanation. "You look different," he said awkwardly. "I am," she replied simply. He nodded, fumbling. "I've been meaning to call you." "For what reason?" I wanted to apologize." She smiled faintly. "You don't owe me words, Ethan. Just learn from what you lost." As they spoke, reporters began snapping photos. Ethan Reed and Clara Hayes reunited. But this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. She excused herself gracefully when the host called her name. "Good luck tonight," Ethan said weakly. "I won't need luck," she replied, and walked toward the stage. The host handed her the microphone. "Tonight," he announced, "we honor Clara Hayes for her contributions to design and entrepreneurship." Applause erupted. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, eyes glistening. Clara took a breath, then smiled. "I'd like to dedicate this to lessons that come disguised as heartbreak," she began. The room fell silent. "Sometimes," Clara said, "you have to lose everything to find yourself again. You have to walk away from what belittles you, even if it breaks your heart, and build something that reminds you of who you are." The audience listened, captivated. Ethan lowered his gaze, his hands trembling slightly. Clara continued, her voice steady but warm. "To every woman who's been told she's too sensitive, too emotional, too small, remember, your value isn't measured by someone else's success. Applause filled the hall, louder than the night he once mocked her. Cameras flashed, capturing not revenge, but rebirth. When she lifted her glass, she added softly, "And to those who doubted us, thank you for the motivation." The line drew laughter, admiration, and a standing ovation. She smiled, the moment glowing with poetic justice. Ethan clapped too, quietly, his expression heavy with realization. After the event, Clara stepped outside. The night air felt crisp, familiar, like the evening she'd once walked away in tears. But this time, she wasn't broken. The same moon hung above, but she had changed beneath it. Her assistant joined her, handing over her coat. "You were amazing tonight," she said. Clara smiled. "It wasn't about me. It was about what I became." Across the street, Ethan watched from a distance. He didn't approach. There was nothing left to say. For the first time, he understood that success meant nothing without humility, and love meant nothing without respect. Clara glanced his way briefly, nodded once, not in anger, but in peace, and entered her car. As the driver pulled away, she looked out at the city lights reflecting on the river. Her reflection in the glass was calm, assured. The same woman who had once been a symbol of someone else's pride was now a symbol of her own power. "Freedom looks good on you," she whispered to herself. Back at home, she placed the award on her shelf, beside a small framed photo of her old studio, the one with paint stains and borrowed furniture. It reminded her of where she began. She touched the frame lightly and smiled. "You did it," she whispered. The next morning, she received an email, an offer to design the interior of an international art museum. It was the biggest project of her career. She sat quietly for a moment, letting the news sink in. Then she typed a single line to her team. "Let's begin." Weeks later, as the museum project launched, articles appeared everywhere. Clara Hayes, the designer who redefined resilience. Her story inspired millions, not because she sought revenge, but because she chose dignity. She became proof that silence, when filled with purpose, can be louder than rage. On a quiet evening, Clara stood by her window, watching the sunset spill across the skyline. Her phone buzzed with new messages, new clients, new beginnings. She turned it face down and exhaled. The wind rustled her curtains softly, like applause from the universe. She had walked away once, not in defeat, but in power. And she would never look back again.